don't interrupt each other. So I'm going to talk about my new book, Thank You for Being Late, An Optimist's Guide to Thriving in the Age of Accelerations. And then afterwards, we're going to have them on sale, and I'm happy to sign a copy for anyone who wants. Thank you for being late. First question I always get is, where from comes the title? And the title comes from actually meeting people for breakfast in Washington, D.C., where the New York Times Bureau is. And I often meet people for breakfast. I don't like to waste breakfast alone if I can learn from somebody. And every once in a while, someone would come 10, 15, 20 minutes late. They say, Tom, I'm really sorry. Is the weather, the traffic, the subway, the dog ate my homework. And about 3 years ago, one of these people, Peter Corcell, came about 15 minutes late. Said, I'm really sorry, Tom, is the weather, the traffic, the subway. And I interrupted him. I said, Peter, actually, thank you for being late. Because you were late, I've been eavesdropping on their conversation. Fascinating. I've been people watching the lobby. Fantastic. And best of all, I just connected two ideas I've been struggling with for a month. So thank you for being late. People started to get into it. They'd say, well, you're welcome. Because they understood I was actually giving them permission to pause, to slow down, to reflect. In fact, my favorite quote from the first chapter of the book is from my teacher and friend Dov Seidman, who says, when you press the pause button on a computer, it stops. But when you press the pause button on a human being, it starts. That's when it starts to reflect, to rethink, to reimagine. And boy, don't we need to be doing a lot of that right now. So this book was actually triggered by a complete accident when I paused to engage with someone I wouldn't normally engage with. So I live on Bradley Boulevard, and I take the subway to work about once a week. And that, for me, involves driving to the public parking garage beneath the Bethesda Hyatt. And I park there, and I take the red line into D.C. And about 3 years ago now, I did that, and parked in the garage. I took the red line in, worked at the Times office, and at the end of the day, I took the subway back. Got my car, my timestamp ticket, handed it to the parking garage attendant. He looked at it, looked at me, and said, I know who you are. I said, great. He said, I read your column. I said, that's great. He said, I don't always agree. I thought, get me out of here. But I said, that's good. It means you always have to check. And I paid him, and I drove off. A week later, did my weekly trip, subway into D.C., red line back, car, timestamp ticket, cashier's booth, same guy's there. This time he says, Mr. Friedman, I have my own blog. Would you read my blog? I thought, oh my God, the parking guy is now my competitor? What just happened? So I said, well, write it down for me and I'll look it up. So he wrote down took a piece of receipt paper and he wrote down odanambi.com. I got home, I looked it up on my computer. Turns out he's Ethiopian, writes about Ethiopian politics from the perspective of the Oromo people, a real democracy advocate, and told my wife about it. I thought about it for a couple days, and I decided this was a sign from God, that I should stop and pause and engage this guy. But I didn't have his email, so all I could do was park in the parking garage every day, and which I did for 4 days, and we eventually overlapped. And I stopped under the gate so it couldn't come down, and I got out of my car, and I said, Ayile, now I know his name, I'd like your email, which he happily gave to me. And that night I sent him an email, and I said, I have a proposition for you. I am ready to teach you how to write a column, if you will tell me your life story. And he basically said, I see you're proposing a deal. I like this deal. Okay. So I repeat all our emails in the front of the book. I saved them, and they're quite funny, our back and forth as we got to know each other. And so he asked if we could meet near his office at Pete's Coffee House in Bethesda, and we arranged that for 2 weeks later. And I arrived with a 6-page memo on how to write a column. And he arrived with his life story. And I basically explained to him, and if the world is a big data set, this is my algorithm. This is how I go about organizing my thinking. So I explained to him that a news story is meant to inform, but a column, an opinion column, is meant to provoke. So I'm either in the heating business or the lighting business. That's what I do. I either do a heating or a lighting, okay? I'm either trying to stoke up an emotion in you or illuminate something for you. And if I really do it well, I do both and create heat and light to produce a reaction. And I know if I've created heat or light because I'll get any one of a number of reactions. One is, if you read my column, you say, I didn't know that. That's a good reaction. If you read it and say, I never looked at it that way. That's a good reaction. I never connected those things. That's a good reaction. Your favorite, you live for this, happens 4 times a year. Mr. Friedman, you said exactly what I felt but didn't know how to say. God bless you. I want to kill you dead, you and all your offspring. I get that. That tells me I've created heat or light. So any of those will tell me I've created heat or light. But I explained to him that to create heat or light required a chemical reaction. And you have to combine 3 compounds. The first is, what is your value set? What is it you are actually pushing by way of ideas and values? Are you a communist, a capitalist, a neocon, a neoliberal, libertarian, a Marxist, a Keynesian? What is the value set you're trying to promote in the world? Second, how do you think the machine works? So the machine is my shorthand for what are the biggest forces shaping more things in more places, in more ways, on more days. I'm always carrying around in my head a working hypothesis of how the machine works. Because as a columnist, what I'm trying to do is take my values and push the machine in that direction. And if I don't know how the machine works, I either won't push it or I'll push it in the wrong direction. And lastly, what have you learned about people and culture? How the machine affects different people and how different people and culture, their reaction, affect the machine. Because there's no column without people and there are no people without culture. Mix those 3 together, stir, let it rise, bake for 45 minutes, and if you do it right, you'll produce a column that produces either heat or light. That's basically the method to my madness. And over 3 sessions at Pete's Coffee House and several emails, I explained this to Ayile. He then told me his life story. It's a wonderful story. Ethiopian immigrant, was an economics grad of Haile Selassie University, a political activist on behalf of democracy, basically got thrown out of Ethiopia, came to America as an immigrant, a political exile, found his place here, was working at the parking garage just to make money. He had been blogging on Ethiopian websites, he told me, but they were too slow. They wouldn't turn his stuff around fast enough. So he started his own blog, and now, Mr. Friedman, I feel empowered. It's a wonderful story of how anyone today can participate in the global conversation. His Google metrics say he's read in 30 countries. This is the garage guy. Who knew? Until I paused to engage him. Well, the more we went back and forth, the more I started to say to myself, well, if that's what a column is about, what's my value set? As those of you who read me know, I have a rather quirky set of views. I'm not quite a liberal, certainly not a conservative, and that's because my values actually come from the small town in Minnesota where I grew up, because I grew up in a time and place where politics worked. And that's really where my politics was set. How do I think the machine works today? And what have I learned as a columnist for 40 years for the New York Times about people and culture? And I decided one day, you know what? That's the book I'd like to write. And that's what Thank You for Being Late is about. The first part of the book is about how the machine works, and the second part is how it is not just changing, but reshaping the world, affecting people and culture. So how does the machine work today? Let me talk a little bit about that. I think what's shaping more things in more places in more ways and more days is that we're in the middle of three nonlinear accelerations all at the same time with the three largest forces on the planet, which I call the market, Mother Nature, and Moore's Law. So the market for me is digital globalization, not your grandfather's globalization. That was containers on ships or on planes. That's actually flat or going down. I think what is driving globalization today, what's making the world go from interconnected to hyper-connected to interdependent, is the way everything now is being digitized and globalized. If you put it on a graph, I'm talking about through Twitter or Facebook or MOOCs or PayPal, you put it on a graph, it actually looks like a hockey stick. Mother Nature for me is climate change, biodiversity loss, and population. If you put it on a graph, it looks like a hockey stick. And Moore's Law, coined by Gordon Moore in 1965, the co-founder of Intel, posited that the speed and power of microchips would double roughly every 24 months. It's now closer to 30, never mind. That exponential has held up for 52 years. Now, pretty much every year, someone writes a column or story somewhere that says Moore's Law is over or about to end. And all those people have one thing in common. They've all been wrong. And this exponential, which is what drives all of technology, has held up for 52 years. I think what is reshaping the world today is the interaction of these three. More Moore's Law drives more globalization drives more climate change, and more solutions to all of these problems. As I said, the first part of the book is how these accelerations work, and the second part is about how they're reshaping politics, geopolitics, the workplace, ethics, and community. So let me just talk about one of these accelerations, the driver of really all three, and that is the acceleration in Moore's Law and technology. Now, one of the hardest things for the human mind to grasp is the power of an exponential, because we so rarely encounter one in our lives. And Moore's Law is an exponential. In fact, the Intel engineers a few years ago decided to explain the power of Moore's Law. On the back of an envelope, they said, what if the 1971 VW Beetle improved at the rate of Moore's Law and microchips? What would it be like today? And they estimated that that 1971 Beetle today would go 300,000 miles an hour, it would get 2 million miles per gallon, and it would cost 4 cents. You'd be able to drive it your entire life on one tank of gas. That's the power of the technological exponential that we're in the middle of. And it just keeps going. Now, my chapter on this is called What the Hell Happened in 2007? 2007, this innocuous year. What's this guy talking about? Well, here's what happened in 2007. The year kicked off with one Steve Jobs introducing something called the iPhone at the Moscone Center in San Francisco in January 2007, beginning a process by which we are now about halfway through putting into the hands of everyone on the planet a handheld computer connected to the internet with the same, more compute power actually, than the Apollo space mission. That's how the year started. Also in 2007, a company called Facebook, which had been confined to high schools and universities, late 2006, it opened its platform up to anyone with a registered email address. And in 2007, Facebook went global. In 2007, another company called Twitter split off on its own platform, and in 2007, went global. In 2007, the most important software you've never heard of, called Hadoop, named after the founder's son's toy elephant, launched its algorithm into the wild. Hadoop is basically what enables 1 million computers to work together like they're one computer. That's what we call big data. It was not invented by Hadoop. It was really invented by Google through a couple of programs called GFS and MapReduce. But as Doug Cutting, the founder of Hadoop, explains in the book, Google lives in the future and sends us letters back home. And what Google did was basically invent these programs and then leave a trail of breadcrumbs for the open source community to reverse engineer them and create an open source version of Google's magic sauce. That became Hadoop, and that became the foundation of big data. That started in 2007. Also in 2007, the second most important software you've never heard of, called GitHub, actually now the world's largest open source software repository, opened its doors in San Francisco. In 2007, up in Seattle, a guy named Jeff Bezos launched the world's first ebook reader called the Kindle. In 2007, a company called Google bought a little-known TV company called YouTube. And in 2007, the same company called Google launched into the wild an operating system called Android. In 2007, IBM started the world's first cognitive computer called Watson. In 2007, 3 design students in San Francisco, attending the design conference that year, heard that all the hotel rooms were sold out and people who wanted to come to the conference couldn't have a room, and one of them happened to have 3 spare air mattresses. And they rented them out to people who wanted to come to the conference, and it worked out so well. In 2007, they started a company called Airbnb. Here's what else happened in 2007. In 2007, let's see, in 2001, this is the cost of sequencing a human genome. In 2001, it cost $100 million. In 2006, basically, it fell to $10 million. And then in 2007, you'll notice, or it goes over a cliff in the year 2007, down to $1,200. Solar energy took off in 2007, as did a process for extracting natural gas from tight shale called fracking. In 2007, this is a picture basically of social networks. The white line going down, that's actually the cost of generating a megabit of data. And you'll notice it basically heads down in 2007. And the blue line is the speed of transmitting a megabit of data. You'll notice the 2 lines cross in 2008. That's close enough for me. That's what Moore's Law looks like. In 2007, actually late 2006, the internet for the first time crossed 1 billion users. And in 2007, for the first time, people sent more text messages on their phone than phone calls. In 2007, Intel, for the first time, went off silicon to extend the Moore's Law exponential. They introduced non-silicon materials into their microchips. And in 2007, Michael Dell, who decided to retire in 2005, decided he better come back to work in 2007. Turns out, friends, 2007 in time may be understood as the single greatest technological inflection point since Gutenberg. And we completely missed it because of 2008. So right when our physical technologies just took off, like we were on a moving sidewalk at an airport, and it suddenly went from 5 to 50 miles an hour. Right when that happened, all of our social technologies froze. All of the learning, adapting, managerial systems, regulation or deregulation. So much of that froze because we entered the worst recession since 1929. Those 2 things coincided, and there are a lot of people that got truly uprooted and dislocated in the junction of those 2 years. Basically what happened, I forgot, yeah, this thing called the cloud, it started in 2007. I always forget that slide. Here's basically what happened. This blue line here, this is just a rough graph. It was drawn for me by Astro Teller, who runs Google X. I was in to see Astro one day, and I was describing the theory of the book, and he just went over to his whiteboard and he drew this. So the blue line is the average rate at which human beings and societies adapt to change over time. You'll notice it has a positive slope, but it's very gradual. The white line is technology. So if you lived over here in the 11th century or the 12th century, we forget you could go a whole century and your bow and arrow didn't get any better, okay? Very flat. And then eventually we got Copernicus and Galileo, and then Steve Jobs and Intel, and the line starts to go due north. And then Astro drew that little diamond there. I said, what's that? He said, we are here. We're at a point now where the average pace of technological change, which is 2 to 3 years, is just much faster than society can adapt to. Even a local community takes 5 to 7 to adapt their regulations. Just ask anybody in the automated car business. Then Astro got another magic marker, and he drew that little dotted line there. I said, what's that? He said, that's the average, that's learning faster and governing smarter. That is our challenge today. How do we lift this adaptation line so more people can learn faster and govern smarter and meet technology closer to where it's going? So what happened in 2007? I think what actually happened was that, your computer is made of basically five key parts. It's got that CPU, that Moore's Law chip processor. It's got a storage chip. It's got networking. It's got software. And it's got a sensor. It's got a camera. And what I explain in the book basically is all 5 have been in the Moore's Law. And I think what happened was they all melded together in 2007 into this thing we call the cloud. The cloud. But I never use the word the cloud in my book because it sounds so soft, so fluffy, so cuddly, so benign. Sounds like a Joni Mitchell song. I've looked at clouds from both sides. This ain't no cloud, folks. This is actually a supernova. That's what I call it in the book. Supernova is actually the largest force in nature. It's the explosion of a star. And basically what I think happened in 2007 is we got just an incredible release of energy into the hands of men, women, and machines that almost overnight changed 4 kinds of power. Changed the power of one. Wow, what one person can do today to make things or break things is a degree of difference that is a difference in kind. We have a president, we all know, who can sit in his pajamas on Saturday morning in Mar-a-Lago and tweet out to the world and reach 1 billion people from his bedroom through Twitter without an editor, a libel lawyer, or a filter. I'm not going there. It's a statement of fact. But what's really new is the head of ISIS can do the exact same thing from Raqqa province. That's a real change in the power of one. Power machines have changed. We woke up to that on February 14th, 2011, and went on All Places, a game show. There were 3 contestants. 2 were the all-time Jeopardy champions, and the third simply went by his last name, Watson. Mr. Watson passed on the first question. But on the second question, he buzzed in before the 2 humans. The question was, it's worn on the foot of a horse and used by a dealer in a casino, and in under 2.5 seconds, Mr. Watson said in perfect Jeopardy style, what is shoe? And for the first time, a cognitive computer figured out a pun faster than 2 human beings. Oh, it's changed the power of ideas. So ideas now flow and circulate faster than we have ever seen before. People forget 5 years ago, Barack Obama said marriage is between a man and a woman. Today, blessedly so, he says marriage is between any 2 humans who love each other. And he followed Ireland in that position. So we see ideas now changing and melting away at a speed we've never seen before. And lastly, it's changed the power of many. So as our power as individual humans and machines gets super empowered, we have become a force of and on nature, so much so that the new geological era is being named after us, the Anthropocene. Well, I think these 4 changes in power, they're not just changing the world. They are fundamentally reshaping the world. And as I said, they're reshaping 5 realms: politics, geopolitics, ethics, community, and the workplace. Let's talk about a few of those. How is the workplace being reshaped? And so many of the students here are going to be dealing with this very shortly. Well, my chapter on that subject is called How We Turn AI into IA. How do we turn artificial intelligence into intelligent assistance, ANCE, intelligent assistance, ANTS, or intelligent algorithms so more people can learn faster and govern smarter? I think that's the work challenge of our day. And I had a lot of fun traveling around the country, discovering how many people are working on this problem. So my example for intelligent assistance is the HR department at AT&T. I spent a lot of time with the AT&T team. 360,000 employees. Company living on the edge of the supernova, wakes up every morning competing with Verizon and Deutsche Telekom and Sprint and T-Mobile. Pretty good chance that whatever AT&T is doing in their human resources department is coming to a neighborhood near you. So here's AT&T's, in a nutshell, intelligent assistants. They begin every year with their CEO, Randall Stevenson, now gives a radically transparent speech to the employees about where the company is going, what businesses they're going to be in, and what skills you need to be an AT&T employee that year. Then they put every one of their employees on their own in-house LinkedIn system. So they got Shibley Telhami there, Shibley, and they've determined that there are 10 skills you need to be an AT&T employee and advance. And Shibley is a good student. He has 7 of the 10 already, according to his LinkedIn profile. Then they but he's missing 3. Then they created an in-house university in partnership with Udacity and created nano degrees for all 10. Then they came back to Shibley and said, Shibley, here's the deal. We will give you up to $8,500 a year to take the courses for the skills you're missing. And by the way, we heard you're interested in religious history. We're in for that too. And in fact, we'll even pay for the $6,000 online master's degree in computer science from Georgia Tech that we created. There's just one condition, Shibley. You have to take these courses on your own time. Now, Shibley may say, you know what? I've climbed up one too many telephone poles, and I'm just not up for this anymore. In which case, AT&T now has a wonderful severance package for Shibley. But Shibley won't be working at AT&T much longer. Their social contract is, if Shibley takes these courses, they will offer him all the new job openings first. They won't go outside. But if he doesn't, he's now really taking his chances. Their new social contract with their employees is very simple. You can be a lifelong employee at AT&T now, but only if you are a lifelong learner. If you are not ready to be a lifelong learner, you can no longer be a lifelong employee at AT&T. The notion that you stock up, even at a great university like this, for 4 years, you fill your cheeks and brains with knowledge, and then you spend them over the next 30 years of your career, I'm afraid that's over. Every company now is going to be expecting lifelong learning, and the best ones, and this should be part of the social contract, are creating the potential for that. I call that intelligent assistance that allows people to learn faster and govern smarter. Intelligent assistant, ANT. My example is the janitorial staff at Qualcomm. So I also spent a lot of time at Qualcomm. They made the inside of your cell phone. That was not made by Apple. It was actually made by Qualcomm, most of the chips and the software. They have a 64-building campus in San Diego. And 2 years ago, they took, I think it was 6 of the buildings, and they affixed sensors to everything, every door, window, pipe, drain, sink, HVAC system, computer. They put sensors on everything. They beam all the data up to the cloud, and then they beam it down onto an iPad with an incredibly friendly user interface for their janitorial staff. They created an intelligent assistant for their janitors, so if Shibley leaves his computer on or a pipe bursts above his head, they know it before he does, and they just swipe down to see either how to repair it or who to call. They have made their janitors into maintenance technologists. Their janitors now give tours to foreign visitors. Think what that does for the dignity of a maintenance person at Qualcomm, because they now have an intelligent assistant enabling them to live above the line. Intelligent algorithm, my example of that is the partnership, and some of you may have enjoyed this, between the College Board and Khan Academy, the online learning platform. So I don't have to tell this audience, in 11th grade, we all take the PSAT exam to prepare us for the SAT exam to see if we can get into the University of Maryland or some other school of our choice. If you're a neurotic suburban parent like myself and my wife, you went out and hired a tutor at $200 an hour to goose your kids' scores on the PSAT just to make sure they could get into an SAT into the University of Maryland. A completely rigged game. Because if you came from a neighborhood or a family that A, couldn't afford the $200 an hour tutor, or you didn't even know you could do that, you were at a real disadvantage. A completely rigged game. So 2.5 years ago, the College Board partnered with Khan Academy to create free online PSAT and SAT prep. The way it works is in 11th grade, Shibley now takes the PSAT. He gets his results back, and the results say to him, Shibley, you did really well, but you have a problem with fractions and right angles. You have a problem with fractions and right angles. It then takes Shibley to a practice site just dedicated to fractions and right angles, his exact weakness. If he does well there, it'll take him to another site that says, Shibley, do you realize you could be in AP Math? Maybe Shibley went to a school that didn't have AP Math, or he never heard of AP Math. No, in 12th grade, you could be in AP Math. He does well there, takes him to another site with 180 college scholarships, and if he does well, there's also a site that partners with the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, where young people are now volunteering to shepherd other young people through this process. This year, 3 million American kids participated in this intelligent algorithm between the College Board and Khan Academy. 3 million. Another example of intelligent algorithm is opportunity at work. So as President Lowe can tell us, we probably got about 32 million Americans who started college but never finished. Some went 1 year, some went 2 years, some went 3 years, some went 3.5 years. Never got a BA. But they accumulated a lot of knowledge, sometimes a lot of knowledge. But they go to apply for a job, and the prospective employer says, where's your BA? And you got to say, sorry, I don't have one. And they don't get a job. So these intelligent algorithms have emerged, one opportunity at work that I profile, and another one, where they will now measure what you learned in your 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, or 3.5 years. They then badge it, certify it, and then partner with companies to get you a job without a BA. This is enormously valuable algorithm. I profile Lashana Lewis in my book. She's an African-American woman from Illinois who went to Michigan Tech for 3 years, studied computer science, had to drop out before she got her BA for family reasons, got a job driving the school bus, couldn't make this up, to a computer science school, and working on the help desk at a law firm to help knucklehead lawyers who lost their passwords. And she discovered, was put in partnership with a program, it's a different one from Opportunity at Work, but like it. They measured her knowledge, badged it, got her a job at MasterCard. Today she is a systems engineer at MasterCard, and as she says in the book, the last quote in the chapter, and I still don't have my BA. Now I'm going to make a bet here that none of you have heard of any of these things. And that's because you were following our last election. In fact, there is massive entrepreneurship and innovation going on around the pipeline of education to work. But if you listen to our last election, Bernie Sanders' big idea to help you was to take down the big banks. Donald Trump's big idea was to take down Hillary Clinton. And Hillary Clinton's big idea was to direct you to her website. But no one is telling anyone about what's actually going on in the country, the massive, massive entrepreneurship around intelligent assistance, and intelligent algorithms. Now, my chapter on politics, how it's being reshaped, is called Mother Nature's Political Party. And the chapter is built around the idea that I think we're not just going through one climate change right now, the change in the climate of the climate. We're going through 3 climate changes at once. We're also going through a change in the climate of technology, and we're going through a change in the climate of globalization. We're in the middle of 3 climate changes at once. Now, what do you want when the climate changes? You want basically 2 things. One you want is resilience. You want to be able to take a blow because you're going to get whacked. Something's going to happen when the climate changes. But at the same time, you want propulsion. You want to be able to go ahead, to leap ahead. You don't just be curled in a ball under your bed. So I thought about that, and I thought, who can I interview about how you get resilience and propulsion when the climate changes. Who could advise me on that? And then I realized I knew a woman. She was 3.8 billion years old. Her name was Mother Nature, and she dealt with more climate changes than anybody. So I called her up. I said, Mother Nature, I'm working on this book. Could I come over? She invited me over. I sat her down. We did an interview. How do you produce resilience and propulsion when the climate changes? She said, well, first, Tom, I have to warn you, everything I do unconsciously. I said, what are your killer apps? She said, well, first of all, I'm incredibly adaptable in a brutal way through natural selection. But in my world, only the adaptive survive. Secondly, she said, I'm incredibly entrepreneurial. Wherever I see an opening in nature, I fill it with a plant or animal perfectly adapted to that niche. I love innovation and entrepreneurship. Third, she said, I'm incredibly pluralistic. Oh my God, I love diversity. In fact, my most diverse ecosystems are my most resilient ecosystems. I love to try 20 different species and see who wins. Fourth, she said, I'm incredibly sustainable in a circular way. Everything is food. Eat food, poop seed, eat food, poop seed. I'm incredibly sustainable. Nothing's wasted in my world. Fifth, she said, I believe in coevolution. I'm incredibly hybrid and heterodox in my thinking. There's no dogmatism in my world. I like to mix the right bees with the right flowers, the right trees with the right soils. I think things that co-evolve are much more resilient and propulsive. I mix all kinds of things together. And lastly, she said, I do believe in the laws of bankruptcy. I take all my failures, return them to the great manufacturer in the sky, and then I take their energy to nourish my successes. Well, my argument is that the political party, community, or country that most closely mirrors Mother Nature's strategies for building resilience and propulsion when the climate changes, they are the ones who will do the best in this age of acceleration. And since it was an election year, I thought, what the hell? What if Mother Nature were running in the 2016 election? What would her political party look like? And I created Mother Nature's political party on the basis of these strategies. I won't go through all 18 points of her platform, but I'll simply say that obviously this is just a proxy for my own politics. The core idea is that on some issues, Mother Nature is actually, like Tom Friedman, is actually to the left of Bernie Sanders. I think we should have single-payer health care. I don't see if it can work for Sweden or for Singapore, and I'm not running for anything, don't worry, why it can't work for us. I'm actually to the left of Bernie, or maybe Bernie's there himself. But at the same time, I'm to the right of the Wall Street Journal editorial page. Because I believe to pay for it, we should abolish all corporate taxes and replace them with a carbon tax, a tax on bullets, a tax on sugar, and a small financial transaction tax. I want to get radically entrepreneurial over here to pay for the safety nets I think we're going to need over here and trampolines, because the age of acceleration is going to be too fast for more people. To me, in my head, more safety nets and radical entrepreneurship, they go together. In Mother Nature's mind, she would make these things co-evolve. They obviously go together. But in our politics, if you're for safety nets, you're never for radical entrepreneurship. And if you're for radical entrepreneurship, you're never for safety nets. What would Mother Nature call that? Stupid, okay? And I believe that is why all our political parties, they're actually blowing up. That's what we're in the middle of. Because these parties were basically designed to answer questions of the New Deal, the Industrial Revolution, the early IT revolution, and civil rights, both race and gender. And I believe the question a political party has to answer today is how you respond to these three accelerations, how you get the most out of them and cushion the worst when they're changing these three climates. And we're now in the middle of all of these parties blowing up. The Republican Party had already blown up. Donald Trump was just an invasive species who took over an empty shell, basically. And you can see it in the British Labour Party, you can see it in the British Conservative Party, you can see it in the Democratic Party. All of these parties are going to have to blow up. My own feeling is that's a very healthy evolution of creative destruction. So that is my politics. Let me close by just talking about quickly the last two other areas that are going to be reshaped. The first is ethics. People always say ethics, like how did that get into this story? Oh yeah, we're going to need massive moral innovation. So my chapter on this subject is called, Is God in Cyberspace? Best question I ever got on book tour. 1999, I'm in Portland, Oregon at the Portland Theater. I'm selling a book called Lexus and the Olive Tree. Question time comes, a man stands up in the balcony and says, Mr. Friedman, I have a question. Is God in cyberspace? Is God in cyberspace? And I said, I have no idea. Never thought about that before. And I felt like an idiot. So I went home, and I called my spiritual guide. He's a rabbi I met at the Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, named Zvi Marks, a brilliant Talmudist. He actually lives in Amsterdam, married to a Dutch priest, very interesting character. And I tracked him down in Amsterdam. I said, Zvi, I got a question I've never had before. Is God in cyberspace? What should I have answered? And he said, well, Tom, in our faith tradition, we actually have two concepts of the Almighty. One concept is that he's almighty. He smites evil and rewards good. And if that's your view of God, he sure isn't in cyberspace, which is full of pornography, gambling, cheating, lying, prevarication, and now we know fake news, okay? But Zvi said, fortunately, we have a post-biblical view of God. And the post-biblical view of the Almighty is that God manifests himself by how we behave. So if we want God to be in cyberspace, we have to bring him there by how we behave there. If we want God to be in cyberspace, we have to bring him there. Well, I liked his answer. I actually put it all in the paperback edition of Lexus and the Olive Tree, where none of you saw it, and it sat there for 20 years. Anyways, I started working on this book, and I found myself repeating that story. Just unconsciously, and I finally sat myself down and said, why are you repeating that story? And then it immediately became obvious to me for two reasons. And this year, 2016, or this past year, was really the year. It was the year that we woke up and discovered that we were living a majority of our lives in cyberspace. It was where we were communicating, where we were dating, where we were finding a spouse, where we were making more of our purchases, doing our business. Our lives have migrated, and last year was kind of the tipping point, into a realm where we're all connected, but no one's in charge. That is my definition of cyberspace. It is a realm where we're all connected, but no one's in charge. There are no stoplights in cyberspace, no courts, no justice, no police, no 1-800, please get Putin to stop hacking me, okay? But that's where we're living our lives. In other words, we are living our lives now in a realm that is fundamentally God-free. And at the same time, my accelerations have superempowered men, women, and machines so much and so quickly that we are now standing at a moral intersection we've never been at before. In 1945, we entered a world where one country could kill all of us. If it had to be one country post-Hiroshima, I'm glad it was mine. I think we're entering a world where one person can kill all of us, and where at the same time, because of the same amplified powers, all of us could actually fix everything. We have never been at this intersection before where one of us could kill all of us, and all of us could actually feed, house, clothe, and educate with these same tools and powers everyone on the planet. We have never been here before where one of us could kill all of us, and all of us could fix everything. What does that mean? We have never been more godlike as a species. And if we are going to be more godlike as a species, we all better be in the grip of the golden rule. Do unto others as you wish them to do unto you. Every faith has their version of it, because we now live in a world where more people can do unto you. Putin did unto us in this election, and we can do unto others farther, faster, deeper, cheaper than ever before. We all need to be in the grip of the golden rule. Oh, I know what you're thinking. I actually gave this as the commencement address at Olin College of Engineering last June. And when I made this point, I said to the gathered students and parents there, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, I paid $250 grand to get my kid an engineering degree, and they brought in a knucklehead commencement speaker who's preaching the golden rule. Is there anything more naive? And my answer to them and my answer to you is that naivete is the new realism. Naivete is the new realism, because I'll tell you what's really naive. Thinking we're going to be okay in a world where this many people have this many amplified powers and machines if everyone doesn't embrace the golden rule. Where does the golden rule come from? And this is how my book comes full circle. It comes from two places, I think, primarily. Strong families and healthy communities. That's where you learn to do unto others as you wish them to do unto you. Well, I would never presume to preach to anyone about strong families. I hope I built one, but you have to talk to my daughters. But I do know something about healthy communities, because I grew up in one. And that's why the book ends where I started, back in a small town in Minnesota, outside of St. Louis Park, basically a suburb of Minneapolis, outside of Minneapolis, called St. Louis Park. And I tell the story of this little town and how it evolved. So the short version of it is basically the Jewish community in Minneapolis, where my parents were born into, all lived in a ghetto in the north side of the city with African Americans, not because they were integrated there, but because they were isolated there. Minneapolis was the capital of anti-Semitism in America in the 30s and 40s, until Hubert Humphrey became mayor and cleaned it out of city government, a real hero in our house. Before Humphrey gave his great 1948 civil rights speech, he actually practiced civil rights on anti-Semitism in the Minneapolis city government. My parents couldn't join AAA back in the 40s, early 50s. In the mid-50s, after the war, I was born in 53. In 1956, almost the entire Jewish community in North Minneapolis moves out in a 3-year period en masse to one suburb, one town, called St. Louis Park, the only one that didn't have restrictive covenants, redlining, and had a housing stock that could take them all. So my aunt and uncle moved 2 doors down this way. My other uncle moved 1 door down that way. Overnight, a suburb that had been 100% white, Protestant, Catholic, Scandinavian, basically, became overnight 20% Jewish, 80% white, Protestant, Catholic, Scandinavian. If Sweden and Israel had a baby, it would be St. Louis Park, okay? So, and thus began a very interesting experiment in American pluralism. How are these people going to get together? And I tell the story about basically how these neurotic Jews shot out of a cannon and these pluralistic Swedes built a community together. And it's a kind of an interesting story, because I went to high school, Hebrew school, or lived in the same neighborhood at the same time with the Coen brothers, Al Franken, Norm Ornstein, Michael Sandel, Sharon Isbin, the guitarist, Alan Wiseman, who won the National Book Award, Peggy Ornstein, the journalist, Dan Wilson, who wrote Someone Like You with Adele. We all grew up in the same place at basically the same time. The Coen brothers movie, A Serious Man, was about basically our little town. In fact, if you watch No Country for Old Men, there's a scene where Churga blows up a car outside of a pharmacy in Mexico to go in and steal drugs, and at the end the camera pans to the pharmacy. It's called Mike Zoss Drugs. That was our local drugstore. And so I tell the story, and it was not an easy story. There were broken hearts and broken dates and broken friendships and broken loves and all those things. But in the end, we built a pretty inclusive and interesting community that had a deep civic culture that affected all of us. It drove me into journalism. It drove Al Franken into politics, drove Norm Ornstein into political science, drove the Coen brothers into filmmaking, Peggy Ornstein into journalism. It had a very interesting effect on all of us. And also shaped our attitude to the world, because there's something called, and it's true, Minnesota nice. And it's why I'm sort of the moderate I am. If I tell the story, I was home actually working on the book. I was at a wedding for one of my closest friends, and my friend Jay Goldberg came, and he got there and he said, Tom, my wife Eileen was driving on the highway, the ring road around Minneapolis today, and a guy almost drove her off the road on the highway. And she came home and she said, Jay, I was so mad I almost honked. Okay? That's Minnesota for road rage, okay? But I tell a story in the book. There was a Jewish mafia in Minneapolis in the 40s and 50s. My dad was not in it, but he had a lot of friends in it. And when I was a very young boy, 5 or 6 years old, I don't remember, but I never forgot this. One of my dad's friends was arrested and sentenced to jail. And as a 5-year-old, 6-year-old kid, I thought, oh my God, my dad knows someone who's going to jail. And I asked him, Dad, what did he do? And he said, son, he was shopping in a store before it was open. That's Minnesota for breaking and entering. Anyways, I tell the story of our community, and then I come back, because I went home, I interviewed all my teachers, all my classmates. It was a lot of fun. Then I come back 40 years later, during the last 3 years. Come back to my same high school. Now it's 50% white Protestant Catholic Scandinavian, 10% Jewish, 10% Hispanic, and 30% Somali. And African American, but mostly Somali and some other East African refugee populations. The same neighborhood that took the Jews took the Somalis. And now I tell the story of the inclusion challenge. Much deeper, gulf to bridge, both religiously and racially. But ain't that the story of America? Oh, and by the way, Mr. Trump, ain't that the story of the world? How do we build now communities with much more diverse cultures? Because in the age of acceleration, contact between strangers, as great historian noted, it's on steroids. And I tell the story of how they're doing. And it's a struggle. It's not easy. But my high school today, according to the Washington Post, high school rankings, is the 5th best high school in the state of Minnesota. The very different student population. But it's a struggle. And it's work, and they have to work at it every day. But whenever I think about the challenge, I think about something my teacher for all the science in my book, Amory Lovins, great physicist, said to me once. I said to him, Amory, are you an optimist or a pessimist? And he said, Tom, I'm neither, because they're just two different forms of fatalism. Everything will be great. Everything will be awful. Amory said, I believe in applied hope. And I believe in applied hope. And what makes me an optimist is that when I go at least home to my hometown, and there are many communities like it, I just happen to know this one intimately, there are a lot of people actually applying hope. In fact, if you want to be an optimist about America, stand in your head. The country looks so much better from the bottom up than from the top down, okay? Because I find many, many communities where the challenges are big, but there are so many people who want to get caught trying. So many more than you'd ever know if you listen to the rancid, toxic politics of Washington, D.C. So my book has a theme song. It ends on my theme song, and this is how I end my talk. It's by Brandi Carlile, who's a wonderful country folk singer, one of my favorites. And she has the song, I believe, of our time. And the song is called The I, E-Y-E. And the main refrain is, I wrapped your love around me like a chain, but I never was afraid that it would die. You can dance in a hurricane, but only if you're standing in the eye. And I believe my 3 accelerations, they are a hurricane. I believe Donald Trump is selling a wall to the hurricane. My book is selling an eye that moves with the storm, draws energy from it, but creates a platform of dynamic stability within it, the healthy community, where people can feel connected, protected, and respected. I believe the great struggle in our politics going forward is going to be between the wall people and the I people. And my book is a manifesto for the I people. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much. That was wonderful, as is the book.
Thank you.
And first, let me add my welcome to you as well. I'm really appreciative for your
My
friendship and your support to our program, the university. And I know how much demand there is on your time, nationally and globally. And despite the fact that you're a Minnesotan at heart, you're still a Marylander now.
Absolutely.
So he's one of us. So,
absolutely.
I appreciate that. So what I would like to do is just ask you a few questions, and then we'll open it up. Maybe we'll take a couple of more questions from the audience before we have the book signing.
Is there a book signing after, you said?
Book signing, not only a book signing, but those of you who don't have the book to sign, there's also, the books are being sold in the back. And you're also welcome to stay for a reception with food and drinks afterwards as well. So let me start with something that you ended with, which is your optimism or applied hope.
Yes.
And I know that's been a critique of the book anyway.
Yeah.
Because the first part, and let's get that out of the way, I think most people will agree with you on. I think you do an incredible job describing the accelerated technological development, and especially even for people who really follow it. I'm a fan of technology. My wife says I'm like a kid in a candy store on technology, and I embrace it. It doesn't scare me. I jump on it. I can't wait till tomorrow because of technology. So I'm with it. I'm still learning a lot, and I've found a lot in there that was really insightful.
Wonderful, appreciate it.
So no one really would, I think, discount that part. And also, let's get another thing out of that, which is, of course, what you mean by this change, whether it's the technological acceleration or the market or the globalization and the climate change. Is not something that is a policy choice. You're talking about a historical unfolding process.
Yes.
No one can stop it. Certainly no one party or country can unforce it. It's not a political choice that people have to make. When I'm in the Middle East often talking about globalization, say, I'm not for globalization.
It's right.
I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
So let's get that out of the way. I think we all understand we're talking about historical processes that are with us to stay, that no one can stop. Maybe we can influence a little bit on the margin, but they're outside of everybody's control. So the real question is what you have raised here, which is really a central question about our adaptability. You know, how do we adapt? Can we adapt at the same rate? And there's a lot of evidence that we haven't done that. I mean, that's obviously the case. So the question is where you find that optimism that we could do it. And part of the reason I ask this question is that, I mean, when I look at the data, not only about the 18 recommendations you make, which are sensible to me, and I may agree with them, but I look at where our politics is. I look where our parties are. I look at the partisanship. I look at our elections. I look at our discourse. And I say, how in the world, yes, if, maybe, perhaps, but how is this ever going to happen? And to give you an example of this kind of something that worries me, and I'm like you, an optimist in the sense that I've been working on the Arab-Israeli issue for decades. How could you do it without being somewhat of an optimist? But when you look at something that you ended with, which is the ethical part and the golden rule, I want to give you some information about what we find in our polling. So we have, through our new University of Maryland Critical Issues poll, have actually been polling on how how important the golden rule is in people's life. We're actually asking those questions, and particularly in a poll that I'm doing among evangelicals. We're trying to do more. And so it turns out that actually Americans overwhelmingly, almost 90%, say it's maybe the single most important rule in their lives. So their sense of self is they're good people, and they want to do what's right for everyone else. And yet, when you ask them, do you feel a moral obligation to help refugees, even aside from accepting them into the U.S., helping them out there, divided 50-50. Divided 50-50. They don't put two and two together. And if you add to it even the sense of responsibility, which is that a majority of Americans think we are partly responsible for the refugee crisis in Syria and Iraq. So this is separate from the golden rule, that we, on the one hand, they say we're responsible, you know, whether they blame maybe George W. Bush, some blame Obama, even our own President Trump says those presidents were responsible for the millions of refugees, quit the mess in the Middle East. And yet you've got half of Americans who don't even think we should have a moral obligation to help. So how do you square that? And what makes you optimistic?
I use a lot of drugs. No, don't tweet that, it's a joke, okay? Well, first of all, I confess, I'm just built this way. Okay, so, and I say it in the book, if you grew up in the context I grew up in, you'd be an optimist too. And so I am built this way, to look at the glass. You know, you'll appreciate this. I was in Israel once. My column runs in Haaretz, and the Israeli paper is very important to me. So the editor of Haaretz once had a dinner for me and invited a bunch of people, including Israeli general. And as we were going to the dinner table, and I'll let the phone get answered. This general said, "Tom, I know why you're an optimist." I said, "Really?" "It's because you're short." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You can only see that part of the glass that's half full." Okay. So I'm not that short, but I am an optimist. And so partly it is, Shibley, I'm an optimist because I'm a parent. And if you have two girls, as I do, who are going to grow up in this world, then you cannot afford to give in to despair. Mm-hmm. So it's a strategic decision for me as much as an emotional one. There are enough people doing pessimism. And, and so, you know, no pessimists ever change the world. And I would also say on all the issues that you raised, and they're all valid, imagine a different leader educating Americans differently. I tell you, if you tell me that 50% of Americans are for the golden rule just sort of de novo, you know what I mean, whatever.
90% of them,
I'm sorry,
actually,
yeah. Imagine if we had a different president educating and nurturing this conversation in a different way, explaining the world to people.
By the way, I wrote a column saying just that.
Interesting. God bless you. So that's really what I feel. And so that's what I'm trying to do. And what I've discovered, I've been on book tour now since early November, all over the world. It's been really interesting. And what I found are a couple things. One is, I mean, people are just starved for navigation because no one's telling them out what's going on, or at least I have an argument. Maybe I'm wrong. We can argue about that, but at least I have a take on the world. I've tried to do it after 3 years of homework, you know, not just because I woke up one morning and felt like tweeting something. And so people are starved for navigation from trusted navigators. Now, there are a lot of people who don't trust me, don't like me for any number of reasons. But if people think you're coming at it straight, you know, that's what they're really missing. We have such a deficit, I think, of that kind of navigational leadership. And what worries me is in an age of acceleration, small errors in navigation can have huge consequences. If you just need to go 5 miles an hour because you got to go just 50 miles, you get off course with a bad leader. You can easily get back on course painlessly. But when you need to go 50,000 miles at 5,000 miles an hour, you have a pilot who enters just 2 digits wrong in the navigational system of that 747. You can get wildly off course. And I believe that's where we're headed. We're headed wildly off course, where the pain of getting back on course is going to be enormous if we go down this road.
Well, just to follow up a little bit on that, and I don't mean to infuse an element of pessimism into it more than necessary, but I think one of the things that, I mean, there is an objective source of optimism, right, obviously, in it as well.
Can I just add one more thing?
Sure.
I'm sorry. And please follow up on this, but my optimism comes out of my reporting. I've been all over this country working on this book. There is amazing, look, we have communities that are suffering. We heard about that in this election. We certainly had that demonstrated. We also have communities that are creating incredible adaptive organisms to deal with the age of acceleration, where the business community is partnering with the public school system, partnering with the philanthropic community, and partnering with the local government to create these adaptive organisms that are very much keeping up with the age of acceleration. Come with me to Minneapolis, we have 2.9% unemployment. Come with me to Seattle or Portland or Austin or Raleigh-Durham, where I was last week. West Denver, I tell you, there's so many more communities that are actually figuring it out. And that is a source of optimism for me as well.
And I think that there's a lot of examples that you give, actually, and they're objective, and they're reporting, and obviously global, not just in the US, and you see that. And that comes a little bit also outside of your other work about the world is flat, where obviously the globalization has, in fact, opened up opportunities we haven't had before. But maybe there is something else that's working against adaptability, and that isn't in there. And maybe this adaptability is that some people adapt better than others, yes, but maybe isn't just a function of who can figure it out, but it's more about who's got the resources. And so we know that in a way, in our election, the system is rigged was something that drove a lot of people's, attitudes. In fact, in our own poll here 2 weeks before the election, we found 2/3 of Americans, Republicans and Democrats, said the system is rigged. A majority want to see significant change take place in our system. So this sense that the system is rigged, it goes beyond sort of just the optimism and pessimism, because they're pessimistic about the structure, about their ability to affect it, when you have that many people say so. And so the question is whether this comes not so much because of this dislocation that comes out of the technological change, maybe that accelerates it, but something more profound about the nature of our system. I mean, if you look at the works like Thomas Piketty's work and the arguments that have surrounded that, controversial for sure, economists have disagreed, but at least the sense that certainly capitalist economies, the United States in particular, but others, the gap is widening. The clustering of the wealth among the 1%, and not only that the gap is widening over time, but that somehow we're ceasing to be a meritocracy, because the people who are taking advantage of those opportunities that are opened up by globalization, that are adapting, they're exploiting, are people who are at the top. And because capital can buy knowledge, we say knowledge is power. You have a whole section on that, which obviously everybody agrees with that. But maybe you can buy knowledge, and maybe if you have more money, you can buy it. And so for every success stories that you have, that globalization opens up, maybe some people will co-opt those. So whether it's in India or it's in Egypt or it's somewhere else, you're going to have people who have opportunities. They're going to be co-opted into the 1%. And you have the center of the rich countries and the center of the developing countries coming together through this globalization, and then the gap is widening, so that the system is rigged sense isn't just local, it's global. And so you're one of the really wonderful things about the book is that you bring in even the Arab world and the uprisings. And so that if you're thinking about the uprisings in the context of this shift that has taken place, and if you look at the metaphor of Mohammed Bouazizi in Tunisia, the self-immolation victim, who clearly his cry was really the system is rigged. It wasn't that I lost my livelihood. It's just I can't. It's helpless. I'm helpless. The cry is the system is rigged, and so how do you square that? That you've got some sense. Maybe it's objectively. Some people argue it's objectively true through work like Thomas Piketty's and others, but some people who at least perceive it to be that way. The fact that people perceive it that way is beyond contention, because we see the polling where people say the system is rigged against people like me.
Well, I'd say a few things. One is that where to start? First of all, my instinctive reaction is maybe the moment of history when everything was equal for everybody and everything was wonderful for everybody, I might have missed that. So like, it's compared to what? Let's be serious here for a minute. And by the way, the economic data now showing in this country that income gaps are narrowing, that the trend line is a different way. But let's also acknowledge that you and I were born. How old are you?
I'm 2 years older than you.
Okay, so you're 65, I'm 63. So I grew up in the golden years of the American economy, when income gaps were much narrower because we had higher walls of protection, strong unions. And I have a congressman from Minnesota who talks about growing up in Minnesota in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, where if you were a white male, you needed a plan to fail. You actually needed, he said, Rick Nolan, you actually needed a plan to fail, because there was such an updraft of blue-collar and white-collar work, because America stood astride the post-war global economy so powerfully, and these industries were just taking off. So my uncle actually worked as a loan officer at the local bank in Minneapolis. He only had a high school degree. I always think about that. My uncle was a loan officer with a high school degree, because back then you just needed a plan to fail. what basically happened is that started to fade out in the 80s as the IT revolution began and globalization started to set in, 80s to early 2000s. But a lot of people got through that with Visa cards, with a home mortgage that they could borrow against and ride up the value of their home. There were a lot of construction jobs for people who had middle skills. And we embraced women in the labor force. So you had two-income houses. I think what happened is, think about what happens in 2007, 2008. First of all, 2001, China joins the World Trade Organization. So suddenly the China train of trade and imports to America comes down the track at a pace we've never seen before. Now, normally people would have jumped to different jobs through that creative destruction. And right when that happens in 2007, the AI train comes the other way and wipes out more white-collar and blue-collar middle-skilled jobs than ever. And then 2008 takes away their mortgage or puts their house underwater, and they can't move. So we had a confluence of these things that happened, I think in 2007, 2008, that really destabilized and uprooted a lot of people, and we did not have the safety nets, we did not have the mechanisms in place really to deal with the scale of people who were uprooted. So, and you know from my platform in the book, it's all about how to now do that the right way. Let me just say what troubles me about this moment, Shibley, what makes me a pessimist, and you'll really pardon me for being entering the vernacular for a moment, but there is a mood around the world of what I call fuck it, don't fix it, okay? I don't like the EU, fuck it. I don't like NAFTA, fuck it. I don't like free trade, just get rid of it. Wait a minute, what happened to fixing things? What happened to reform? You don't like TPP, how about fixing it? And we are now playing with big systems, and it's being done by ignoramuses, in my view, okay? And does the EU have problems? Guess what? The EU isn't perfect. But where did the EU come from? Oh, I forgot. These people have been fighting each other for 1,400 years. And maybe, and maybe just getting rid of it will be a real how about we try to fix it? Got a problem with NAFTA? Fix it. Got a problem with TPP? Fix it. Got a problem with NATO? Fix it. But no, everyone's so, because I think this is a product of social networks, everybody's so aroused and arousing everybody else that doing the painful, slow work of reform has become a dirty word. I wrote a book, I was here last time to talk about it. It's called Hot, Flat, and Crowded. It was about energy and environment. And my favorite chapter in that book, to all the students here, I say, is called If It Isn't Boring, It Isn't Green. And what was the theme of the chapter? The theme of the chapter is everyone wants to be Al Gore. I have a confession to make. I'd like to be Al Gore. I would like to win a Nobel Prize, an Oscar, an Emmy. I'd like to be Al Gore, really. But I profile in this chapter one of the greatest American green heroes. You've never heard his name. He worked for NRDC, and what was his invention? He figured out how to massively save energy of every Coke machine, every soda pop machine in America. Now, you know how you do that? You've got to study how a soda pop machine operates. You have to understand how it interfaces with a utility. There is nothing more boring in the world than a public energy utility. It's the most boring institution in the world. And this guy did all that hard work, and he figured out how to do that, and he massively reduced the energy of every Coke machine in America. If it isn't boring, it isn't green. Today, though, everybody wants to go to the bottom line. I'm going to take you down. I'm going to take you down. And so we're getting all our, I talk about this quote outside, we're getting our freedom from, thanks to all of these notes, so we got our freedom from Mubarak in Egypt, and we got our freedom from taxis through Uber, and we got our freedoms from Marriott through Airbnb. Everyone's getting freedom from, but the freedom that really matters, this is Dov Seidman's point, is freedom to. That's what we really want, the freedom to speak freely, to run for office, to build a community. And freedom to takes time, and it's really boring. And no one wants to do that anymore. Everyone's aroused. Everyone wants just to wreck it don't fix it. And if we end up abandoning the concept of reforming and fixing things, woe be unto us. The EU is the most boring institution in the world. I did a column about the EU when this started happening in defense of the EU in the face of Brexit, and I began the column by saying, I'm calling it now Trump's EU, to fool the search engine, because otherwise none of you will read this story, okay? Now we're going to talk today about Donald Trump's EU. Okay, now that I've got you, the three of you still reading, let me explain to you why the EU is the other great center of democracy, free people, and free ideas. And Donald Trump, who's never lived abroad, who's never gone to the West Bank, and discovered that the EU is funding all of these projects there. He's never been to sub-Saharan Africa and run into EU aid missions. He's never seen any of this. He's never driven. He only helicopters to his golf course at Doonbeg. Actually, I'm a golfer, and I am on the staff of Golf Digest. And I actually, I profiled the golf course Donald Trump bought on the west coast of Ireland. It's called Doonbeg. It was 10 years ago. He didn't build it, but he bought it later. And the thing I remember most from that trip is the number of roads that had a sign on them that said, this road brought to you by the European Union. Go to Spain and look at how many roads like that. So is the EU not perfect? Flash, it's not perfect. Are they regulating too many fish? Yes, probably so. Did too many immigrants be allowed to go to the UK? Yes. How about we fix it, not wreck it? And so that's what really, you want to get me going pessimistically.
Yeah,
when the drugs wear off,
yeah.
Okay,
Well,
that's what worries me. And when you have a complete ignoramus who is leading this process, someone who doesn't read, who gets his idea from the shows, okay, leading this process, we're in a, so if you want me to go dark, I'll go dark for you, okay?
well, let me take you there. Let me take you to that dark spot. I know you know our president.
I do.
You may have even golfed with him.
No, I never golf with him. But
you never golf
we
with
know each other from that universe.
And I know you do golf, but you
not
didn't
with
golf
him.
with him. But even before, since he was elected, he came to the New York Times. And you met with him at the editorial board. It was one of the first things he did after getting elected, despite the failing New York Times comment. And you spent time with him before, you spent time with him then. Obviously, regardless of what he's done since being president, I want to ask you two questions about him directly. One is about, so what's your take other than what you just said? If you can embellish that a little bit more, it'd be good. But more seriously, is going back to the climate change issue, which is something that is dear to your heart, obviously is important in the book, but it's also the one question that you raised with him, and the one question that you raised with him because, not only because it's dear to your heart, but because you really thought that he could make a difference on that particular issue. So I wonder if you could tell us more about both of those issues.
I don't want to pretend that I know the president particularly well, but we knew each other from the world of golf, you know. And I'll tell you a story. It's not no great secret. The day the president announced the Iran deal, he invited me, President Obama, to the Oval Office to do the interview on the Iran deal. For me, really one of the most exciting journalism moments I ever had, because it was such a historic thing. And I had broken my shoulder 2 weeks earlier. So I was on total painkillers. My colleagues had to tie my tie. I brought my daughter along just to carry my stuff, you know. And I did the interview, and then afterwards, you know, the morning show's called, you know, would you be on? I said, look, I'm in such pain that I'll come on in 2 weeks, but I'm just got to go home and lie down. I had to write the interview like this. It was just, and the great thing about Barack Obama, God bless him, he speaks in sentences and paragraphs. So I could just cut and paste, okay? I could just cut and paste what he said, and it made it so much easier for me. I didn't have to type every word. So anyways, 2 weeks go by, Morning Joe calls, and in between, Donald Trump comes out for president. And they have me on the air now. They don't want to talk about the Iran deal. All they want to talk about is Trump. So they said, what do you think about Trump and the wall? I said, look, I believe a country, I'm a hardliner on immigration. I think a country has to control its border. I'm for a very high wall with a very big gate. Okay? I think you have to assure people you can control the border and then have a big gate.
That's one of your 18 points.
That's one of my 18 points. So I get home, my secretary calls, says, Donald is looking for you. So he calls me, he says, Tom, high wall, big gate. I really like that. I'm going to use that. And I said, Donald, you can use it if you give me credit 1 out of 4 times. And the next day on the debate, he said he was for a high wall with a beautiful door, which was not quite what I had in mind. But I did tell him, I said, because Ann, my wife, knew I was talking to him, and she said, I said, my wife has a message for you. He said, what's that? I said, my wife says, you have the country's attention. Use it for good purposes. And he said, oh, I will. Okay. So I don't want to pretend that I know him. I'm by nature, if he does the right thing, I will support good things that he does. If he had done the right thing on climate and I teed it up for him, he said on climate, he said, I have an open mind. And then Al Gore saw him the next day or the day after. And then if there are 333 million Americans, 148,000, he actually found the worst person in America to run the EPA. Okay? I mean, the single worst person in America. And so I just saw that and just said, this is not serious. He's been captured. I don't think he really knows that much about it. He certainly doesn't know anything about it. But I think he's surrounded by some people we've never seen in American politics, who believe deep and dark things. And I'm afraid between them and the sort of the conservative right of the far right of the Republican Party, he's really in the grip of them. And but I think ultimately,
and he's still optimistic.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm doing everything I can, but I'm really worried about where we're going.
Well, I'm going to ask you one last question, and this is the Sadat chair.
Yeah.
And you and I have written a lot about a favorite subject, the Middle East. And talking about our president, he made news by talking about one state, 2 states, and suddenly in one sentence he raised a whole debate. We're talking about the forces of history versus policy choices. We're talking about things you can control, things you can't control, processes that are underway. So I want you to just quickly, if it can be done, reflect on this Arab-Israeli issue, Palestinian-Israeli issue particularly right now as it's unfolding. Political identity, the nature of the conflict itself. Are we headed toward a one-state solution by default? Is this really where we're headed? Where Zionism and Palestinian nationalism will be footnotes in 10, 20 years? Or are we headed towards something else?
Well, I never believe that anything is over per se, because these are about political choices, and people can always make different political choices. But absent different political choices, Shibley, this thing is over. Because Israel today has never been more home alone. Not in the existential sense, but in the sense of being free to be whatever it wants to be. The Arab states around it are weaker than ever. Palestinians are more divided than ever between Gaza and West Bank. And America is out of the Middle East peacemaking business. Jared Kushner, maybe he's going to come in, and they're going to give him a plane, and he's going to come out, and Trump says, look, my son-in-law, he's been to Jewish summer camp, he's an expert on the Middle East. Must be, right? He went to Camp Ramah. So it's, talk about a cliched view of the world. So, and our Secretary of State is, I just don't know what's going on there at all. So, so Israel's never been more free to be whatever it wants to be. And I think that given the inertia in Israeli politics, that what it's going to end up being is by default a one-state solution. I've started referring to Prime Minister Netanyahu as the Prime Minister of Israel-Palestine, because I want him to own that appellation, and not keep saying, oh, Kerry's coming, or Jared Kushner's coming, or, you know, and then behind the scenes, the settlers keep doing their thing. So that's why I did do a column a few weeks ago saying that only Donald Trump can save the Jewish people, save the Jewish state. Because if he were to come out and actually draw some red lines, it actually could make a difference right now. But I don't think he has it in him. But who knows? We could be surprised there, because he's so unpredictable. But I think when you look at the leadership in Israel now, how Israel's drifting to the right. Now we have this whole NGO law that I have to be careful what I say. I might not get a visa to Israel, you know, now, if I speak the wrong way about BDS. Israel is really, Israel, Erdogan, Turkey, they're all just mini versions of what's going on here. Majoritarian politics, captured by the right, playing the anti-media game, and basically making people afraid. And through that, driving a nationalist, populist agenda that ultimately will, I think, eliminate the chance of Israel being a Jewish democracy in time. And if you care about that, as I do, and would like to see a Palestinian state alongside of it, you really have to despair about the direction.
Well, thanks so much. Let's take just a couple of questions together. We're running late, and I want to give him time to sign books. And so why don't we take two from the audience? We'll take one from this side. Go ahead. Yes. They'll bring the microphone to you. Someone will bring the microphone to you. He's coming over.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Even though it was a bit dark at the end there, I think overall it was optimistic.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So I had a question, full disclosure on a paper I'm working on.
I love it.
I wonder what similarities and differences you see between the kind of populism that we saw at the end of the 19th century and what we're seeing now, and what the connection is between populism and globalization.
Right. That's a good question. Did you all hear that? He wants to know if I'll be signing my book after, and I will be. Thank you so much for asking, and good luck on that paper. No, it's really sort of comparing the populism of the end of the 19th century and today. And well, you know, one obvious connection is that you had this same technological leap around the railroad and the steam engine and the telegraph, you know. But today, what's so different, and this is where I think people sometimes lose sight of that, this happens now so much faster and to everyone at once. So when the iPhone was launched in San Francisco, it was being used in Ivory Coast and South Africa within a month. That was not true of the telegraph or the railroad or any of these things, let alone the printing press. They all evolved so much more slowly and over a just much longer period of time, so people could absorb them and sort of evolve along with them. So that's the big change. That's one big difference. And the other big difference is that everyone now has a voice. And so, you know, one of my two favorite interviews in the book, actually, with Wael Ghunaim, who was the Google guy who launched the Facebook revolution in Egypt, and I forget his name now, but the guy who was one of the leaders of Occupy Central in Hong Kong, and was so interesting. And I interviewed them a year apart, obviously totally different places. But you might want to use this in your paper, because they both said the same thing. We never could have done this without Twitter and Facebook. And we could never succeed with Twitter and Facebook. We couldn't have launched without Twitter and Facebook. We never could have got so many people mobilized. And once we got them mobilized, everyone was saying, why is Shibley in charge? Why am I not in charge? Oh, did you hear this about Shibley? Heard he's on the take a little bit, you know. And so social networks destroyed all the confidence and the ability to build trust within an organization, and government moves at the speed of trust. So it got them started, and it destroyed their ability to take their freedom from and turn it into freedom to. And I think that's a big challenge today. And I think it's a huge issue in our own politics now. This book is a celebration of everything old and slow. And the underlying theme of the book is what really matters when the world gets fast is everything you can't download. It's everything you have to upload the old-fashioned way. Through good teacher-student relationship, good parenting, strong families, good spiritual leadership, healthy communities, all this old-fashioned stuff. I'm on Twitter only because the New York Times tweets my column. And if Shibley comes and asks me to tweet his poll, I will tweet his poll. But you will notice I'm not on Twitter. And if anyone out there is addressing me on Twitter, I'm not listening. Okay. Okay. And you'll also notice I don't have a Facebook page. I have a defensive Facebook page because there are a million people creating false Tom Friedman pages. But I don't go there at all. I know who my friends are. I don't need a thumb up or a thumb down because they're not that. And to me, anything said in 142 characters is a sign of the apocalypse, especially if it's done anonymously. So like I talk the talk of technology and globalization. I absolutely do not walk the walk. And I'm old, I'm slow, I'm a late adopter of everything. Another of my favorite interviews with a book is with our Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy. Very interesting, amazing guy, Indian American. We were talking one day and I asked him about what's the most prevalent disease in America. Is it diabetes, cancer, or heart disease? He said, oh, it's none of those, Tom. It's isolation. I said, wow, we live in the most connected age in history, and the Surgeon General is telling me that the biggest disease in the country is people feeling disconnected from one another. And that's why the book is so much built around the idea of community and building community and reconnecting that way. So that's a scattershot answer to your question, but I hope it helps. Let me know if you get an A.
I have a young man here, and by the way, I am a fast technology adopter.
Yeah, I know that you are. I'm not.
And I am on Twitter at Shibley Telhami. So follow me. Yeah, please.
Yeah. Great. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Get the microphone, please.
I'm just wondering if you're going to sign your book today.
Thank you.
Could you talk about what it's like to be a journalist today and what journalists should strive to do in this age of politics?
Well, that's a very good question. What's it like to be a journalist today? My daughter is actually a journalist. I'm proud to say she works as editor on Morning Edition at NPR, so I have a lot of compare and contrast. Well, the first thing is that when I actually started at UPI, I was hired I went to grad school at Oxford, studied Arabic Middle East history there, and I got hired on Fleet Street in London. That's where I started as a journalist. And then I was there for a year, and then they sent me to Beirut. So that's where I actually started my journalism with UPI. And back then, of course, working for a wire service, UPI doesn't exist anymore, it was like AP and Reuters, you had to file a lead, file a radio spot, write a picture caption, all within 5 minutes. That was really what it was like to work for a wire service. And then when the New York Times hired me in 1982, it was so great, I just write one story on deadline, send it in, and then just relax for the rest of the night. Now I go out in the field and I see my colleagues. They've got to do a Facebook post, a Facebook Live, then tweet about their story, then write an update for the web version before the first edition of the paper, and then the international. I said, oh my God, that's why I left wire service reporting to go to the New York Times. But now we're all wire service reporters. That's one big change. Obviously, social networks are a big change. And we write our own headlines, but they now play around with different headlines to get more attention, through the search engine and whatnot. And there's so many more people writing about you. Like I remember, because I covered the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982, and I remember, because that was very controversial, the press coverage of that. And I remember the first time somebody wrote about me. And I thought, like, why would anyone write about me? I'm just doing my job here. But now, every journalist wants to be like Glenn Thrush on Saturday Night Live and be pictured in the audience, you know what I mean? And so the danger, there's a lot of dangers in this. So we have the most email list in the New York Times, updated, the 10 most emailed items in the New York Times, updated every 15 minutes. Any New York Times journalist or columnist who tells you they don't look at that list is a liar. Okay? Okay. How can I not? How am I doing? Am I number 20? Am I number 10? Am I number 1? And honey, I'm number 1 on the most emailed list. Okay, so here's the little problem with that. If I write my column next Wednesday, we have actually a terrible problem in our hemisphere. We have a country melting down in the center of our hemisphere. It's called Venezuela. It's going to have enormous implications. If I write my column next Wednesday about Venezuela, I will not see the bottom of the email list. I think it's up there, but I'm down there. If I put Trump in the lead, good chance I'll be on the email list. Now, as happens, I will write about Venezuela, because I've been there 36 years, and I'm an old fart, and I'll do whatever I want. But if I'm a young reporter or columnist, am I going to write about Venezuela? So there's all this subtle messaging now. Write about Trump, don't write about Venezuela. And so you have no idea what you're not learning now, because the Washington Post has a scoreboard in the middle of their newsroom. Hey, Shibley, your story, look, it's going up. You can actually, there's a scoreboard. Now, thank God we don't have that, but we have it online. We have the same basic thing. This is really dangerous, because you just want to feed the beast then, and we all know how to do it. Do a Trump takedown, and not actually say what's important. I think my paper does a great job of still writing about what's important. But I'm saying there's just subtle things now pushing people in that direction. And again, I see reporters for all kinds of papers, not just mine, beat reporters tweeting opinions. That's just a terrible thing. That's what feeds the fake news. People say, because you're covering the White House and they read, you've got a tweet critical of Trump. And what's the average reader to think? But that you are biased, that Breitbart's right, it's all fake news. I'll tell you a story two stories that really sort of show you what a dinosaur I am. So in the summer of '82, first week in June, summer of '82, Israel invades Lebanon. I'm living in Beirut. And two groups of refugees got in a fight over the apartment building I was in, and the one that lost blew up the building, killing my driver's wife and 2 daughters who were sitting in my apartment. I'd helped dig them out. The New York Times would not let me write about that. They said, you're not the story. Who knows how many other people got killed this week? You are not the story. And they eventually wrote a box about it because other people were writing about it. I never wrote about it. Think about that. If that happened today, if a reporter gets a cut on their finger today, they Instagram it, send it to the world, that, everything's about you. But so that's how things have changed. The New York Times did not let me write about my own apartment being blown up. And my driver's wife and 2 daughters killed in my office. Second story. We had an amazing publisher, Arthur Oakes Salzberger, Punch Salzberger, who was the publisher of the paper when I was hired. And they sent me off to Beirut in 1982 with a New York Times tie. Wished me well. I have been the principal person writing about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Arab-Israeli conflict, for the New York Times since 1982. Other people have been, but I've been sort of the main focus of it. That's 35 years. Punch Salzberger died 2 years ago, and when he died, they invited everyone in the newspaper to write who wanted to, any remembrance of him. I wrote a very short story. And I said, look, I've been covering the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Arab-Israeli conflict for this paper for 35 years. And to this day, I have no idea what Punch Salzberger thought of my coverage. I have no idea whether he thought I was too nice to Bibi, too hard on Arafat, too hard on Bibi, too nice to Arafat. I have no idea. And I've been doing that for 35 years, and that is true of his son, Arthur Salzberger. So it's these people who talk about fake news in the New York, do we get things wrong? Oh yeah, we get them wrong. And we actually have a whole correction section when we do. We are far from perfect. We're all just human beings. But we're not doing fake news. And there is no news organization like the New York Times that has that respect for reporting the news without fear or favor. All these Breitbart people. How do you think they discovered about Hillary Clinton's server? Through Breitbart? They discovered it because we broke that story in the New York Times. So there's just a lot of BS out there, frankly, about what's going on in our whole industry. And so I just urge you to, this is still a great business to be in, to be a journalist. I mean, to be able to participate in this conversation. But at the end of the day, journalists always come to me, young people, say, I want to do what you do, what do I need to know? I say, well, there's actually two things. And the first is you actually have to like people. I actually like people. And it's amazing how many journalists hate people, actually. And because when you like people, they kind of sense that and they open up to you. But the second thing, and it's really more important, and it's kind of a rule of life for me, and maybe I'll just sort of end here, which is that I think to be a really good journalist, I think you have to be a good listener. But not just because of what you'll learn when you listen. That's actually the second most important reason. The most important reason is because listening is a sign of respect. And it's amazing what people will let you say to them as an opinion columnist if they think you respect them, if they think you're listening. So the other part of the story is, of my story is I was the first Jewish correspondent in the New York Times sent to the Arab world and to Israel. And as you know, if you cover my stories, cover my reporting in the Arab world or Israel, I didn't go around all saying, it's all the Yehudis' fault or it's all the Arabs' fault, whatnot. I have my own take, I defend it. But I survived 36 years because people know one thing. I'll give them a fair shot. I will listen. And I won't just wait for them to stop talking. I mean deep listening. Listening is a sign of respect. And if people think you're listening to them, you can actually say amazing, critical stuff. If they think this person really wants me to succeed, and if they don't think you're listening, you can't tell them it's dark outside.
And
so be a good listener.
By the way, there's a political psychologist at MIT who studied that and proved that you're right.
Interesting.
About that. And on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict specifically.
Interesting. Wow.
So,
very interesting.
Very interesting paper.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I want to, before you go, please sit down if you don't mind for a minute, because I want to present Tom with a gift from the University of Maryland, and let me just tell you very quickly about it, because we have here at the University of Maryland something called the Sadat Art for Peace program, where we, in conjunction with our excellent art department, we have a competition every year for a theme that's important, two-dimensional, three-dimensional pieces. Last year was on refugees. This year it's on the Trump presidency and the world. So people are expressing themselves. So this is from the refugee competition. I just want to tell you very quickly about it and tell you what I'm presenting you. First, we had three-dimensional winners. So the first three-dimensional winner was this piece by Grace Murphy called With the World on Your Back. And you can see it's more of a backpack with all of the things that go with it. And this collage was number 2 in the 3D by Trevor Mitchell, just untitled. And then I want to show you the 2D because that's one of the things I want to give you. You see this one, which is actually to your left to the piece itself, which is by Rachel Carruthers, called 20 Million. And then the piece that I want to give you by Sobia Ahmed. And it is really, really appropriate and very interesting because it's a piece. I'm going to give you just a smaller copy of it just to look at while everyone is looking at it. And this piece is really unique. This is a Maryland student of art. She belongs to a mosque in Silver Spring, Maryland. The center of it is her mosque. And if you look closely at it, this is basically was done on white tiles. This is a copy of it. And when you look at it, you look at the minarets, and they look like just ordinary mosques. It was titled Fear. And then remember, the whole theme is about refugees. And it was titled Theme. So look closely at the minarets, and you'll see the creativity of the artist of having all these Western monuments as the